Hello and welcome to this week's review on the My Hero Academia Vigilantes manga chapter titled Fight on Shota. And we kick off this review, as I always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives and the headline positives. The big things I'm discussing over the course of this video. I thought the pacing was brilliant, the artwork was fantastic, and I loved the subversion with the speaker. Now, as I mentioned in my previous review, this review will not be covering anything in the anime. This will not be discussing or making reference to what happens there. I might make some comparisons here and there, but if it hasn't happened in the manga yet, I'm not going to talk about it. But with that said, I just want to point out this is my second attempt to do this review, because I discovered, thankfully, after about a minute, that I'd accidentally left the echo on my microphone. But with that said, let's get to the review itself, and we'll kick off by talking about the pacing. And I will admit that this is one of those things that, whenever I talk about it, regardless of what I'm talking about, it does feel a little bit like filler. Like, oh, I can only think of two things to talk about. Oh, I'll just throw in pacing as a third. But the truth is that when we talk about the pacing when it comes to pieces of media, we talk about it whether it is, well, beyond just media, but also culture in general, it feels like one of those elements that does get forgotten. Because good pacing can make or break just about any piece of performative media, performative culture, in my personal opinion. It's just one of those basic mechanical elements that at times feels like it's overlooked. There are plenty of episodes of Doctor Who that I think would have been better had they been more slow paced, or maybe had an extra 5 or 10 minutes to it, but regardless, for the here and now, here we are talking about the pacing, and I feel that despite the fact that this is an episode almost exclusively focused around the action, and as such this might be a shorter review because of that, this is an episode that covered a lot of ground, and it never felt as though anything was rushed or dragged out. Everything was given the amount of focus that it needed to be, and that, for me, given just how jam-packed this episode is, I really just have to praise that fact, because this is an episode with so much things going on it, a chapter with so much stuff going on in it. It could easily have turned into an absolute dog's dinner, but it didn't. I know, again, talking about praising feels weird. I have never met someone in my entire life who's had that as a key priority as to whether or not they've read or watched anything. And with a series like this, people are more interested in the story and the artwork, maybe the editing and layout if they're like my friends who make comics. But this, for an episode like this, with so much going on within it, it needed the pacing to work, because this is an episode where, given everything that happens therein, it could easily been drawn out to a second episode. Add a little bit of a twist or a complication midway through, then split it into two things. Add a little bit of filler. That is easily what could have happened, but it doesn't do that. It covers the fight brilliantly. From start to finish, it gives us some really thrilling action, and then that transitions into some heartbreaking by the end of it. From heart-throbbing to heartbreaking over the course of a handful of pages, and it does that brilliantly. This is an episode that has 3 key moments in it, and is able to transition from each and every single one of them in a way that it never feels as though the pace is dropping or rushing through anything or dragging it out. It gets it exactly. It hits it like a bloody bullseye time after time after time. The fight with the monster and Eraserhead fearing he can't do it, that then transitions into the pep talk from Loud Cloud, and then that transitions into the aftermath and the revelation that said pep talk was entirely within Eraserhead's mind. It does it brilliantly, and it does not screw it up. Again, this is an episode with so much happening in it, a chapter that is filled to the brim with things happening in it. There could easily have been a moment where any one of these key factors was not executed correctly, and had any of those 3 aspects not been executed in the way that they had been, this episode, this chapter, simply would not have worked. That is a fact of that. The fact that you're going from this big tub thumping shonen manga action sequence to something that is far more typical, the pep talk that you would get from one of the side characters, then the emotional reveal at the end of it, had one of these elements not worked, the entire thing would have been an absolute bust. This is an episode which is one grand action sequence. For the most part, yes, we get the more emotive stuff in the second half of it, but the action never feels rushed, with every element and every moment of it feeling like it is given its time to shine. This is an action sequence, this is an action-filled episode where the action could have felt worse could have felt rushed, or worse, could have felt like it was rushed and glazing Eraserhead and his power and abilities. Now, I will admit that you could have done that with the sense of that we know that he's going to be a great hero in the future, so, you know, showing him being fantastic, brilliant, good now would to some degree make sense in hindsight, but it wouldn't make sense given what the previous few chapters have been spending their time doing. Those previous few chapters were establishing that Eraserhead was not a good student. He wasn't a bad one, but he was in many regards very average. So when he has this moment where he's really having to pull it all out, really have to go beyond, go plus ultra, it has that extra emotional weight to it, that you have a student who, by all accounts, is kind of above average in most things and kind of below average in other things, who's having to pull it out the bag and really go totally to save the day. That makes this whole thing a lot more emotively engaging. Again, in a different series, you could have easily had a thing where he's just as good now as he is in the future. I'm glad that isn't the direction that they went down. And there is still an argument to be made that maybe he shouldn't have fought a villain quite this big and powerful, or at least not defeat him in one episode. But given how he ultimately ends up winning this, I can accept it, both narratively and practically. From a pure practical point of view, he didn't overpower it. He does not have giant frog scaling or what have you. He just managed to find a way to defeat this thing off the back of his intelligence and his skill. He used the things he was strong with. He literally could not overpower this thing because it's simply that far beyond him. But still, he found a way in doing so just by using his wit and his guile to do this. And it is a win that needed to happen to develop his character and to show him growing and becoming more of his own. Again, maybe not a giant frog monster. Maybe that was the wrong vessel with which to do this with. But nonetheless, I still think that this is a sequence that's able to do well, despite the fact it does feel a little bit like shonen anime bullshit in certain aspects. The fact that a guy that only a chapter or so ago we were being told time and again he's kind of a bit crappy, we're now saying, oh, he can defeat a giant 10-meter tall frog monster thing, so doesn't quite work, but it works because of how he defeats him and the narrative impact in how he defeats him. And all this, as I mentioned previously, is aided by some frankly fantastic artwork. There is no dead space here. There is never a panel that feels like it's just there for the sake of keeping the artwork, keeping the image working. Yes, there's some... there are many points where we have the black around the panels rather than just the white of the page, which I don't like, but nonetheless, the action is choreographed and presented brilliantly. There is this great sense of speed and dynamism in the way that Eraserhead fights, in a way that really just shows him off as a fighter. He isn't going in there like a bruiser, just punching his way through this. He's having to be quick, and he's having to make sure he doesn't get pinned down or trapped or caught out by this giant frog monster thing. And this fight is, like I said previously, very well paced. It is fast, but it's not rushed. It is quick, but it doesn't feel like it's racing to its conclusion. It gives us all the spectacle and all the over-the-top presentation that you would want from a teenager fighting a giant frog monster. And this then ends up setting us up for just the horrible drama that comes in the latter half of it. Some of my favourite stuff, some of my favourite artwork in this chapter is the stuff that we see towards the end of this. Whilst I do like the action, whilst I do like how it's presented, and I do like the work that's done there, it is the drama in this chapter, in this episode, that really does find itself elevated so much by the quality of the artwork here. And all the drama that we get in that final act is just wonderful. I know it often feels weird to praise something so miserable as being wonderful, but you know what I'm getting at. That look on Eraserhead's face when he realises what happened to Loud Cloud, and the way that just half his face is shaded, but it's shaded in such a way that it almost looks like a photocopy, like that those weird artifacts you can sometimes get when you photocopy something, and it's just the darkness from the photocopier itself. So it just looks like he is just this shadow version of himself, that whatever just pride and excitement and feeling of self-worth and self-value that you gain from that fight has just been blown out of him, and all that's standing here is just this paper-thin photocopy of himself because he doesn't know how to deal with all of this. There's just this sense of that none of this is real, that this can't be real, and that Loud Cloud, he has to still survive because of what he just went through. He heard him cheering him on, so he must still be alive. And we get that panel at the end of this, towards the end of this, where it's just Eraserhead and Present Mike, and they're stood there, overlooking the rubble and the body of Loud Cloud, and all that can be heard is the sound of rain falling. And just that one whole dedicated page, that panel, is great. It is just this cold, somber, horrible moment that contrasts and has this great juxtaposition with the aforementioned shonen anime, shonen manga bullshit of the teenage boy fighting and defeating the giant frog monster. We are seeing the harsh reality of this world for these characters. And there are minor things about all this part of this chapter that I do like as well. How Present Mike is just trying to smile his way through this and be as supportive to those caught up in this as he possibly can do. And even with Biff, as I call him, he's trying his best to be supportive, but it does feel like a case of, look, mate, this ain't the time for this. He's still trying to be stoic, and he's still trying to be tough and stern, but no, it doesn't work in this moment, mate. Just keep your fucking mouth shut, please. And, Present Mike is trying to make a few jokes about this and trying to keep the mood up, even though he has just that very pained smile on his face as he's trying to be supportive. No one really knows how to act. Midnight is just frozen there. This character we've seen as being just so confident in herself, both in this series and the main one, just can't react. Eraserhead is trying to make sense of that. None of this was how he thought it was going to be. None of this is how he thought it was going. And he now has to try and compute all of this, as well as all the conflicting emotions it'll have within him. And Present Mike is trying to be the supportive friend, and his hero training is coming to the fore, but it is just this reality of the world and the job that they are going into that this is not uncommon. And this itself, this whole sequence of events, sets up why in the main series Eraserhead comes down so harshly on students that put themselves at risk, and that's why he does his fake expulsion thing frequently throughout this series, and well, also within the background from what we know of the main series. He doesn't want these students to be putting their lives at risk like Loud Cloud did, but at the same time he understands that had Loud Cloud not done what he did, those children would not be alive. And the whole reveal of the speaker never working, and the fact that it was all in Eraserhead's mind, is something that sticks out to me, because as I mentioned in my anime review, this is the kind of thing that you would expect in an anime or a manga. You would expect the moment where a character is pinned down or trapped underneath something, and their friend is fighting for their life, so they then start cheering and shouting them on and trying to gear them up so they can save the day. They save the day, but then their friend that's been cheering them on passes away. They gave their all, they gave every last bit of essence that they had to help their friend get the winning by cheering them on and shouting them on. But here that is the case. That just doesn't happen. There are hints, of course, that being the case, that this is how things turned out, because we don't see Loud Cloud cheering on, because had this been like a more typical anime or manga that was setting up for something like this, you'd have seen them in the rubble, you'd have seen them hanging out the rubble, slightly digging themselves out of it, shouting through the gaps, shouting through the darkness and trying to cheer them on, and then they get taken away and they give their final goodbye before passing away. I knew you could do it, I knew you always had it in you, and then they quietly fade away. But this doesn't happen here. And even if that isn't the end result, you'd still have the thing where the character's trapped or injured and they still cheer on their friends, help them get the win in. But here that isn't the case. That isn't the case, despite the fact it looks and it feels like it should be. The anime, I will give it credit for, does play this a little bit more ambiguously, because here, the way that Loud Cloud is hit in the prior chapter, that really was no, he's certainly not alive from that. He's fucking dead, mate. Like, the way that boulder landed on him, he's not shouting out anything from this bit. And whilst I still think the speaker was introduced into the story, this particular part of the story, too soon, and also I suppose in hindsight it should have been established well before this, but nonetheless, I think it was thrown into this whole sequence of events far too soon, because the way that it landed in the scene, it felt like this isn't someone that Loud Cloud had thrown out so he can start shouting and cheering him on, and it just felt like, well, this is someone that's fallen off of him because he's just got squashed. Still, nonetheless, I love the whole bittersweetness of it, that there is this terrifying shock and horror that is present with Eraserhead in this moment. Like, it's just that weird conflict of feelings and emotions within him, where on the one hand he really does believe in himself, and he does have the capability to be not just a hero but a great hero at that he really can believe in himself and he can gear himself up and he doesn't need someone cheering him on, and he can be a good hero, he can be a great hero, but at the same time that was all internal. It was all internal, and that friend that he thought was cheering him on throughout this wasn't. And that friend who had been spending so much time supporting them over goodness knows how long, goodness how many months or years, trying to help them believe in themselves and become the best version of themselves they possibly could be, never lived to see it. And that person never got a chance to see their friend grow and to become the kind of hero that he believed that he could be. And this just conflicting feelings of emotion that Eraserhead would have in him are horrible, and they are tragic. On the one hand, he will be excited and ecstatic that he finally defeated a villain like this on his own, but on the other, there's a heartbreaking reality that one of his best friends is dead, and he thought that he was, and he will no doubt to some degree possibly blame himself and think, well, maybe if I just broke off a little bit sooner, maybe they'd been a bit quicker, we could have saved him, but that's what he has to live with now, and it is something that just makes this whole arc that lot more dramatic and a lot more brutal. With that said, let's get into the negatives, and I only have one really, which is the fact that when we do have that very brilliant panel with Eraserhead and Present Mic standing there looking at the rubble, looking at the body of their friend, the sound effect that we have to indicate the sound of the rain takes away from the quality of the art. I know it's a minor gripe, I admit that it's a minor gripe, but we didn't need to be told what the sound of the rain is, particularly bearing in mind that it's positioned in such a way that it does block some of the artwork. I get the point, I know it's raining hard, I get that, I know what heavy rain sounds like, and look, I am someone who will always advocate that sometimes less is more, and sometimes you can really cut away the over-the-top sound effects and the over-top music, the soundtrack. You can have moody and emotional scenes without having a big dumb soundtrack in the background, and for a moment like this, to just have it being them just standing there in the rain with no hint of anything else going on is brilliant. But the fact that in this moment we just get the rain sound effect plastered over the page does take away from that. I don't remember how that specific moment went in the anime. There's a part of me that's worried that maybe they had a soundtrack underneath it, but I don't remember, so I'm not going to speculate on that. But still, that's my issue. Like, it's a very small thing in the grand scheme of things, but I just think sometimes less is more. And this is something where they decided less was more, but let's put a little bit more back in. With that said, however, let's get into the overview and say that this is a great episode. This is the big emotional climax of this story. I think the next one is going to be the last one of this particular flashback arc. Not 100% sure, we'll soon see about that. But with all that said and done, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, my second attempt to do this because I accidentally switched the echo on my microphone. Just a short comment from Big X1 from the previous video, and they're saying that that particular episode, that particular chapter is a good beginning to the volume. The changes to the anime are small, I presume that's what the end of the message is supposed to say. And yet there have been some interesting changes as far as what would end up being done in the anime is concerned. I'm not going to get into a full back and forth on that, but it's interesting to see how differently things are happening in the manga versus how they were adapted into the anime. Still, let me know what you thought about this particular chapter down in the comment section down below. Thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!